I'm finding it very interesting watch everyone's opinion on this DJI FPV drone as the dust settles. It's been a lot to take in, and anytime we assess something here on the channel, we need to keep in mind not only what it costs, but also what its intended use is. Well, I would argue that one of the intended uses is for creating cinematic footage that takes advantage of the new motion opportunities available to us with an FPV system. We do, after all, get a 4K camera on there capable of 60 frames per second, so I think it's fair to assess that camera on that basis. Can it create cinematic footage? Let me flesh this out a little bit by comparing these three cameras side by side with some test footage. Here we are on the full view, zoomed out if you will, and by and large we're getting a pretty good performance from all of the cameras. If I had to pick a winner in terms of noise and detail, I think it would have to be the Gopro. The less noise the better, it's more visible in the shadows of an image. And this can become a problem if you're trying to correct or grade that footage, as we'll see in a second. Same shot, but this time we've cranked up the shutter speed to underexpose the images so we can see what kind of impact shadow recovery has on the image in post. Shadow recovery done. Well, now we can see that we've got a lot of noise in the shadows and the midtones of all of these images. The two DJI drones aren't faring too well, it has to be said. Zoom in 8 times and you can see that the DJI FPV image in particular is broken. We have blocking and artifacts in the shot there, and we've probably pushed it too hard. And if I had to pick a winner out of those three, it really would have to be the Gopro. Now, before you all shout at me and tell me that you don't zoom in the footage 8 times, that's not the point I'm trying to make. The issue is we need to know as filmmakers how hard we can push our cameras on the day of filming. If we're filming a sunset, then the chances are we're going to have an underexposed ground, and one of the tactics there is expose for the sky, knowing that you can increase the exposure of the ground in post with a gradient filter. We get two color profiles, normal and d-cinelike. Now I would recommend that you stay away from normal because it's very contrasty and it would be difficult to color grade. Look at this d-cinelike test footage. It's quite flat, it's quite unsaturated. Theory being that you can add back that contrast and saturation to your taste in post. Jump across to the normal footage on identical exposure settings and look what's happened. We've crushed the blacks, the exposure of the whole thing has come down, and I just don't know where to begin if we're going to try and color grade that, to be honest with you. If you look at them side by side, you can see the difference there in the waveforms. Now we could compensate a little bit by increasing the exposure of the normal footage to brighten it up a little bit, and there you can see we've got slightly different results, but nonetheless I would rather be trying to color grade and color correct the d-cinelike footage than that normal footage. With that in mind, on the assumption that you're able to shoot nice balanced exposures with no blown out highlights and no crushed shadows on the day, you can grade this d-cinelike picture profile very nicely in the same way that you can grade the flat picture profile here on the Gopro. Your ability to color grade is again going to be completely defined by your ability to capture a decent shot on the day. Now with that in mind, if you haven't seen it already, grab yourself a copy of our free ebook From Drone Zero to Drone Hero, 37 tips to get you flying like a filmmaker. And if you really want to get into this stuff, we have an 8-hour drone cinematography masterclass that I know you will enjoy, because it is after all what you do with the drone that counts. As for field of view, we have a very, very wide and immersive field of view here, but it is introducing one issue, which is the props can be seen in the frame. Now obviously if you're going for a cinematic shot, you're not going to want the props to be seen in the frame. Fortunately, however, DJI have introduced a distortion correction option in here, which does a perfect job of straightening out all those curvy barrel roll effects essentially that come from having such a wide angle lens, and it essentially does away with that issue. One thing I have noticed, however, is that you do get a little bit of prop flicker with this drone, and it's not something I've seen for a while with the Mavics, but it's something that you used to get on the Phantoms. If you fly towards the sun, the props create this kind of halo-y flickering type effect across the screen. Fairly easily fixed in the past by using ND filters. It's particularly bad if you have a very high shutter speed, which by definition you are shooting with on this because we don't have ND filters. So that's something that might be fixed if and when ND filters are introduced, but it's still something you might be interested to know at this stage. Coming back to field of view for a second, it's important that you understand just how wide the field of view is of this DJI FPV drone compared with a Mavic Air 2, for example. So in this instance, we have distortion correction on, shooting at 50 frames per second. And if we superimpose the Mavic Air 2 image, you can see just how small that Mavic Air 2 shot is compared with the DJI FPV shot, because there we have a more normal cinematic field of view, comes in at 84 degrees if I'm not mistaken. As for comparing with the GoPro, we have a super wide field of view, we have a wide field of view, and we have a linear field of view on the GoPro. Now, give or take, the field of view that we get here on the DJI FPV equates to the middle of those 3 field of views that we get on a GoPro, the wide field of view. So if you're trying to make a comparison, that's roughly speaking where we are on that one. As for the linear field of views, which are the ones I'm more interested in because I don't like to see any straight lines bent in my shots, then you can see there that the GoPro linear field of view is a little bit tighter than the DJI's linear field of view, if you like, the distortion corrected field of view. These are all digital adjustments at the end of the day, so it's nothing really that you can't do in post. We only have one lens on both of these cameras. There's no zooming functionality there whatsoever. But what I do find very practical is the distortion correction and also the linear mode, because getting a good D-fisheye plug-in is not the easiest thing, and sometimes it can destroy the image a little bit in post. So I like to be able to shoot in camera with a nice straight horizon, and you can do that on both of these cameras. It's a bit hard to compare the stabilization amongst these 3 systems because obviously we have a 3-axis gimbal here on the Mavic Air 2. We have a 1-axis gimbal in terms of movement, but that 1 axis doesn't perform any stability function. It just allows you to tilt the camera. So from a stabilization perspective, we don't really have a gimbal on this at all. But what we do have is inbuilt electronic image stabilization, which does a good job of smoothing out your moves. By comparison, we have Hypersmooth on these GoPros, and Hypersmooth is mind-blowing. If you've never tried it, you can run with these GoPros and it will stabilize the footage. This is a GoPro 8 and the results are incredible. And on a GoPro 9, we have 5K resolution, so even more capability to punch in and take away the movement around the edge of the frame and stabilize things. It's incredible. It's a pretty tough standard for this to be compared to. But what we have here is the ability to very quickly and very easily create nice, smooth, stable cinematic flight. So we have smooth flight and we have electronic image stabilization, whereas for a beginner or even an intermediate, the chances of you getting smooth flight on a GoPro-based DIY FPV drone build, pretty slim. So do with that information as you wish. I wanted to touch on it, but as I say, it's a bit of a tough comparison. We have a 4K camera here capable of 60 frames per second, so that's nice sharp resolution and it's lots of frames per second. The only thing is we don't have 24 or 25 frames per second, or at the moment the ability to put ND filters on this. I'm hoping that will come. The official line is that DJI are looking at it now. I suspect it will come because otherwise we don't really have a means of creating buttery smooth cinematic footage with the motion blur the eye is accustomed to seeing. That will make it a little bit tricky to blend with your non-drone footage. But as I say, let's assume that it's on its way. I'll try and summarize this as best I can. On the table here, I think it's fair to say that the GoPro is the better performing camera. The issue is, however, the only way I can get it in the air is to bolt it to the top of an FPV drone. I need the time and inclination to do that. Even if I do get it in the air, I then have to learn how to fly it cinematically, and the chances of me doing that are pretty slim in the short run, no matter how good the hypersmooth stabilization may be on that camera. Then if we look at the DJI FPV, on one hand we've got a slightly poorer picture performance, which by the way doesn't mean it's bad, it just means the GoPro's slightly better. Everything here is good and can give you a good picture. Countering that, on the other hand, we have this insanely capable FPV drone that gives us entry into something that we could have never done before, sports mode, which gives us this hybrid option of taking advantage of GPS control but also giving us some FPV maneuvers. We have full manual control that we can get into as and when we have the confidence to do so, knowing that we have an emergency brake, a return to home, a 20-minute battery life, all that kind of stuff. So at the end of the day, the fact remains that this is the only route for many of us into cinematic FPV. Certainly the quickest and the easiest. And I'll cover this in another video, but it looks like it might also be the cheapest way at the end of the day, certainly if you're looking for a digital FPV system. And then of course the Mavic Air 2, well, that's a whole different ballgame. We're looking at traditional cinematic footage. We're not going to get all the jazzy maneuvers, but there's still a lot we can do with this with intelligent flight modes and all the rest of it. So I can just give you some information. You need to decide what your priorities are, but I hope some of that was helpful. As always, stick with us on the channel. We've got lots more drone content coming soon. Leave your comments below. There's a lot to discuss here, and we will see you next time.